That's silly, but I don't see how I can change that now.
You can probably change it by right-clicking on the little thing up where your lock icon is in your browser. You can probably click on somewhere near there, depending on which browser you're using, and be able to re-get to your permissions. And then you'll have to restart. You'll have to reload the page.
There's a camera icon on Chrome and Firefox.
Yeah, maybe not only reload. You have to restart Chrome in some occasions.
Nicholas, I just killed your video by mistake.
Oh,
it moved. It moved. I was about to accept someone's video, and then it jumped, and I clicked on kill your video. Okay. All right, but you figured it out. We tested yesterday. I killed his video and his audio, and then the whole thing crashed.
Yeah, but it was a wrong occasion apparently because they were doing some system maintenance. Hopefully, we don't have the same problems today. So, it's actually 1 minute past. So let's get going. Alan and Carsten, I will kick you off the video now, so we get going.
Yes, please.
Michael, if you want to stay on with video, feel free to do so. So, welcome everybody. Now it's time for the ASDF BOF. ASDF standing for as semantic definition format for data and interaction of things. And let's get going. We're 1 minute past. So first of all, here is the note well, and this is the short form of the note well. For our new people new to IETF, there will be a long form in a moment. The key things are you will be go back, please. Sorry. So you will be recorded. This will be on YouTube afterwards, and this is a public meeting. Be nice and professional to each other, and do remember that the IPR guidelines for IETF apply. That is a link. There is a repo with some more material and so on. Here is the full note well. You can go to that. Here is the full note well. Please look at it if you haven't looked at it at some time. It is important and it governs our work here. And then it will be in effect during this meeting. Before you go to the next slide, there's one thing to mention here. As you remember, the blue sheets, they are virtual this time. They are generated by MeetEcho participation. So if you're in MeetEcho, you will be on the blue sheet. Okay, next slide, please. So the rules of engagement. Here's a small list of rules. So first of all, please try to hold with questions until the end of the presentations. And we will ask you to only have clarifying questions when directly after the presentations. And then we will have a full discussion session after the presentations. Be polite and concise at the mic. Keep your mics muted while you're not talking. And do remember that this is a non-working group forming BOF, so there will be no charter discussion today. This is intended to measure to gather the interest of doing this work in IETF. Yes, so here is the agenda. We will start out with a brief introduction to one data model, one DM, and SDF. Give me a second here. Alan and Wouter, I will just mute you. Or, that will Carsten will provide. And then there will be the ecosystems that have been contributing to this work in the list there. They will say a few words each and explore or expand why they are interested in this work and why they think it should be done. After that, and the correlated clarifying questions, there will be a discussion session about 30 minutes, and here the mic line is open for any kind of questions relating to this topic. And as we get towards the end of this, we will call out the questions to see whether we should adopt this work, or I shouldn't say adopt this work, what should be the next step. As this is not a working group forming BOF, we cannot adopt it, but we can at least point in the in the positive direction what direction this work should take. Before we start here, so I'm Niklas Fidel. I will be doing managing the queue and a bit of the talking introductions, as you've seen so far. Michael Richardson is my co-chair. He will be flipping the slides and doing some other following jabber and so on. And we have Ari and Jaime as note takers who are in the CodeMD. So thank you very much for Ari and Jaime for doing that. With that, I think we can continue. So now on with the introduction to One Data Mole. Karsten, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you. My job for the next 30 minutes is to try to explain what the problem is that we are trying to solve and what the proposed approach is. So let's talk about the problem first. In IoT, in the Internet of Things, we have many different devices, and that's really an overwhelming number of devices that need to be worked with, and different ecosystems like the home world and the factory world and the building management world and so on. These are developing standards for some of these. And the problem that we are running into is that the temperature sensor in ecosystem A is not the same thing as a temperature sensor in ecosystem B. So we have lots of different data models behind these IoT devices, and there's really not much point in this diversity. Of course, sometimes ecosystems have specific requirements, but in many cases, there really is no point in having two different data models with different names for things that are described in a different language, and so on. So the idea is to come up with a way to harmonize device data models. The group that did this that started this in 2018 is called One Data Model, which may be a little bit misleading because, of course, there is not one data model. The intention is to have one data model per kind of device. So in the end, there will be hundreds of data models, or maybe up to 1,000 or so. But one data model means, at least for one kind of device, there will only be one data model. Next slide. So this is not about reinventing the whole stack. We certainly don't need another wire format. The various ecosystems by now have decided how to do their communication and so on. So we are not trying to redo that. This means the data models that we are talking about really are information models, if you know about this terminology from RFC 3444, plus interaction models. Interaction models on the internet side, of course, not on the side where the human user sees buttons or something like that. But the interaction models, how can I request data from the sensor? How can I make the sensor send me something when a certain threshold is reached, and so on and so on. So data and interaction models is the subject here. And of course, different wire formats and protocol details exist, but we think about them as protocol bindings that can be attached to the device data models and tell you how to actually talk to the thing in detail. And as you can see from this, the intention is not to describe everything in all detail formally or something like that, but to do this at the right level of abstraction. And the point is the right level of abstraction will allow us to harmonize things, even if the Modbus people still have their weird data format over serial lines and everything. We still can describe the things at this level of abstraction in a way that allows interoperation. Next slide. Now, the question, of course, is why do we need an effort here? We have so many standards to choose from. Actually, we don't really have the standard we would need here. So, for instance, CNML provides an overall data model and a wire format for data to and from a device. But in SendML, you cannot really describe what a temperature sensor is. You can send data from a temperature sensor, and then if the recipient knows that this is a temperature sensor, it will be able to make sense of it. But SendML itself doesn't do this descriptive part. CTDL is actually a language for defining data models, so that's already helpful. But 1DM really is about data and interaction models. So it's a bit of a different way of doing things. And it's we also probably can get by with a language that doesn't have all the functionality of CTDL, so it's easier to translate into and out of that language. W3 thing descriptions. These describe a single device, not a class of devices like all temperature sensors, but a single device down to the level of protocol bindings. And that's really very useful, but again, it's solving a different problem. And there are, of course, many other activities that could be cited here in the IETF. Of course, we have Yang, which also is a language for describing devices, but on a very, very different level of detail. So the objective of the SDF or ASDF activity is have something that helps in harmonizing data models for large sets of devices with enough similarities. And we can use all the things we have in the process, of course. Next slide. So you all know this comic. That's exactly what we don't want to do. And that also meant not just technical issues, but also how do you position 1DM in a way that the other ecosystems or the ecosystems don't consider 1DM as a competitor, but actually as a good way to achieve interoperability with other ecosystems. So next slide. The situation we want to avoid is that everybody who deals in data from devices from different ecosystems has to solve the n-square problem. And next slide. Obviously, what we all want is this thing in the middle that everybody can translate to and everybody can translate from. So these actually should be many more squares and circles and triangles, because there are so many different formats to look at. There are the ecosystem models like Bluetooth, OCF, OMA, Zigbee. There are other standards like W3C thing descriptions that I already talked about. And of course, there are also implementation-specific models. So most vendors have an in-house modeling technique, and we need to be able to interface to those as well, even if we may not be talking about that in the open very much. Next slide. So 1DM has had its big coming out a couple of weeks ago. It was started as a liaison process in 2018. So there was a meeting in the context of Zigbee, and I'm using the old spelling here, which probably still was the right one in 2018. Sorry. There was a meeting in the Zigbee organization where they invited other people to create an outlook. How should standardization proceed? And one of the most significant results of that meeting was, let's work on harmonizing data models. But all these ecosystem standards development organizations usually work under some form of legal framework that usually includes an NDA and other things. So doing a liaison process between organizations that all work with different legal models is interesting. So when this started, it started under an NDA. And the intention was to pull everybody together and give them a comfortable environment to work, because as the SDOs operate under NDAs, they expect to do their liaisons under an NDA. And that was what the One Data Model organization did for its first year. But yeah, at some point to make this, to turn this into an open process, 1DM had to come out. Next slide. So what has 1DM achieved in this first year? I think the biggest achievement is that there was agreement on a legal model that allows the openness we need to get this done. So 1DM decided that it doesn't want to exist as an organization like the IETF did for a long time. And OCF was one of the organizations that occasionally helped when not existing was inconvenient. But that meant that 1DM also is not the place where you can park copyrights and do legal agreements with and so on. So after some discussion, it was discovered that actually using open source licenses, and in this case, the BSD3 Cross open source license, which is one of the most permissive ones you can get, that this allows cooperation on common models without jumping through all the legal hoops. So the complexity of interacting goes down, the legal overhead goes down, and so on. So everyone keeps their trademarks, everybody keeps their patents, and there is a liberal copyright license. And this is the legal model under which 1DM operates now. The second thing that came out was a common specification format. So this was released a month ago as SDF 1.0, and it's really a 1.0 because it needs work, and that is exactly what this BOF is about, that this thing needs work. So the pink part is what we will be concerned here with, and the other parts are things that 1DM will continue to manage. And the third component of that is actually getting data models contributed that are specified in SDF. And right now we have specimens from 4 SDOs, so a couple hundred right now, a couple hundred data models, and other SDOs are, standards development organizations are in the pipeline for also contributing some. So this SDF is not a paper tiger. People actually have taken their data models in their specific ecosystems and looked at how can we convert this, translate this into SDF. And some of them actually also have started to do the other direction. Next slide. So SDF really is the red star of the picture in 3 slides ago. It's really optimized for collaboration. And I think that's something that people who do specification formats in this space often do not have in mind as the top priority. And yeah, it avoids the N-square problem. And actually, we are already seeing SDOs using SDF as their own development format. So when they do new data models, they write it in SDF first, and then they convert it to their native toolchain. This is not yet official in any of the SDOs, but it's happening. Next slide. So what is this SDF? SDF is a domain-specific language. Obviously, it's solving a very specific problem, collaboration on data models. And it's represented in JSON because that's the lowest threshold way we can actually get interchange between the various organizations and the various tools these organizations are using. JSON means we need a way to actually define the syntax that is not ABNF, but something on the data model level. And the syntax is currently defined both in CDDL and JSON schema.org format. There is a converter from CDDL to JSON schema.org. So we are doing the actual specification in CDDL, but also output JSON schema.org because that is convenient for many people. The data models itself, again, the data models are really data models and interaction models. So the actual data models, the data shape, uses a format that is inspired by JSON schema.org, but it's a curated super subset. So not everything that is in JSON schema.org is in that language, in that sublanguage, and it's also augmented by some IoT considerations that are not part of JSON schema.org. And the interaction model is based on 3 types of affordances. Most ecosystems have something like this, these 3 pillars here: properties, which are data you can set and get; actions, which are things you can ask a thing to do; and events, which a thing reports back is happening. And each of these affordances is characterized by input and output data models. Next slide. So how would we work with that? We are talking about the red star here. Various organizations and ecosystems are building the arrows that convert from and to their native formats, or should I say legacy formats, depends on the ecosystem. And the main user of SDF actually would be 1DM for doing the work on harmonizing the data models. Obviously, 1DM would have a lot of people who are interested in SDF, and in the end will work in this working group as well. And the other users will be the ecosystems, either just as a target or source of translation, or actually as the overall new way in which things are being developed. Next slide. I simply made the same picture for Yang, just to compare to one of the various formats that the IETF is using. Yang is not exactly optimized for converting other formats into and out of it. Of course, it kind of needed to handle the transition from SMIV2, but that's history now mostly. And so Yang is really the focus of people who want to define full-fledged data models that essentially imply the protocol bindings as well. And the main user of Yang is the IETF itself, because we are using Yang to write our own standards. So it's much less about collaboration between different organizations. Of course, there are other organizations here, like Vendor 2 and Vendor 2. Don't know what happened to Vendor 1. And these, of course, also work with Yang and sometimes submit things to the IETF, or don't submit things to the IETF because that's a product feature, and so on. So from 10,000 feet, it may look similar, but when you go down into the way this is actually being used, it's quite different. Next slide. So how would we standardize SDF in the IETF? I think the obvious approach here is to start from what 1DM already has specified and pressure tested, as we are saying in 1DM, by actually converting data models into and out of it. But yeah, the people who are working with SDF know what SDF is. So the specification in many places isn't really something you could send to Mars and have some Martian implemented. So the specification needs to be improved as a specification. And there are also gaps in the functionality. So there are some forms of composition that we will have to address next. Things often are built out of other things, and we have one form of composition, but that's coarse grain, but we don't have composition at the fine grain, so we will have to put that in. So that's gaps in functionality. There is also the question about the stability of the normative references. So there are some things being used in SDF that are not standardized either. And of course, you can copy some of this into the document or work on getting the normative reference standardized and so on. So that's another thing where work needs to be done. And of course, it's also always possible to.
Carsten, could you just say a little bit more about what those things are that it depends on that one?
On the normative references? Yeah, I would have to look into the document. But the most daring one is JSON schema org, of course, because that is the source of the pieces we are using for defining the actual data models right now. But I think there are some other things in there as well, but I can't remember at the moment.
Close enough. That got me on the right flavor. Thanks.
Okay, and the third thing is usability. I think it still is possible to improve on the way this can be used. And one interesting aspect here is we can actually change SDF. So this is a little bit different from working on specs that are offloaded from some other organization, and then you are told rubber stamp this or the whole thing will die. Because 1DM is actually working on harmonizing things, it's actually possible to work with the contributing organizations on making changes in SDF. So we are much less bound to support the same thing forever. We can actually make changes. That, of course, will reduce over time as more and more people are using SDF. But right now, we still are in a situation where things are wide open. And since SDF is meant to be interacted with tools, we can always do things that just require tool support. So throwing out one component and putting in another component, if you can write a tool to translate, and everybody thinks the new component is better, we can do that. Somebody was in the queue.
I have a question about the inclusion of performance characteristics in the description language or in the SDF. It might be useful to understand what the bandwidth requirements are going to be, what the response time requirements are going to be, how often one's going to communicate. The reason for that is that if we have a centralized way of gathering that information for the various things that are connected to a central controller or whatever, we can understand what the burden on the central controller is going to be, or how stringent the response time, the interaction requirements are, or whatever. And I'm wondering if we could include other non-functional requirements in there as well.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea. It's maybe not that easy to capture these non-functional requirements, but if we manage to do that, that would certainly be something that would be very useful in such a data model approach.
I think it would be very useful for capacity planning purposes and for understanding what the performance needs are of any of the components that need to be architected to stitch this all together.
Yes, but some of these performance characteristics can only be analyzed in conjunction with protocol bindings. So we would have to get further in the way protocol bindings attach themselves to SDF to actually make useful statements in there.
Fair enough.
So, yeah, that's an interesting idea, and I agree we should examine that.
Thank you.
With other questions until Carsten finishes, because we are running. You have 7 more minutes, Carsten. So
yes,
for this section. Thank you.
And 4 more slides. Wouter, do you have a clarifying question? Okay, maybe we can continue. So next slide. Why should we standardize this now? This is a good time for doing the handoff. 1DM completed usable input document, the SDF 1.0. And that actually is good enough to get a couple hundred model submissions. And 1DM is indeed willing to transfer change control to the IETF. On the other hand, we shouldn't wait another year or so with doing that, because 1DM wants to address the other data models for which features are missing. And of course, we can hand this back to 1DM and say, yes, do this while we are figuring out what we are supposed to do. But I think that would not be a good way to start the collaboration. And here's the item I just talked already to, where we can still change SDF. Next slide. Why should we have a standard at all? And a standard, with a standard, I mean a standard at the quality level of an IETF specification. 1DM contributors need a stable and well-defined format specification. And 1DM itself needs a stable basis for its model harmonization efforts. So this is a good time to nail this down. And also tools implementers will benefit from having a stable, well-defined specification. So all this work is starting or emerging from the prototype phase now, and this is the right time. Next slide. Why did 1DM get the idea that the IETF might be the right place to standardize this? Well, first of all, IETF has a vendor-neutral process that tends to result in high-quality specifications. So, of course, there are a few other organizations that have a vendor-neutral process. I'm not going to say anything about high-quality specifications. And the ecosystem SDOs are actually used to basing their work on IETF specifications. There's, of course, no IoT product or ecosystem out there that doesn't use some IETF specifications. So they already know what to expect from the IETF, and they trust the IETF to get the job right. And finally, IETF does have some experience with domain-specific data model. I mentioned Yang, so this is not a new kind of work, except this time this is not so much about management and operations, but about application layer. But that's why this is above in the art area. Next slide. So what would an ASDF working group do? It would focus on the SDF specification. That would be its only deliverable, unless there is agreement at some point that we actually need to do something like the JSON path thing. I don't know if you were in the dispatch meeting yesterday. So SDF doesn't need JSON path, so this is just an example. We get by with JSON pointer. But if there are small pieces that actually need to be done to get normative completeness, yeah, that might come up at some point. But right now, I think the only delivery we will really have to make is the SDF specification. And yeah, the normative dependencies, we either ensure that they are stable or we customize them for inclusion in the SDF specification. And the working group would work with 1DM, of course, with IoT data model SDOs. We will hear from them in a couple of minutes, and with IoT vendors. And the deliverable is the SDF format specification. So that's my set of slides.
Thank you very much, Carsten. Now it's time for a couple of clarifying questions. We are close to the 30 minutes, but please put yourself in the queue if you want to, if you have any clarifying questions. I saw a question yeah. Ron, go ahead.
This was my question, which was, given the timeline, well, there's my video. Given the timeline that you're saying it's within months, that doesn't seem very compatible with not forming a working group kind of now. If we need to be able to do whatever edits happen within months, is there a time frame on this, and what is that time frame?
Well, there is not something like the January CES we have to make an announcement for. But yeah, getting this started within months would be useful. And I think getting a stable SDF 1.1 or 2.0, however we want to call it out of the working group by the end of next year would also be very, very important.
Cool. I mean, it sounds very much like this is a working group forming BOF in all but name at that point. Anyway, I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Charles, please go ahead.
Yeah. How do you see the transformation, like the translation happening and the responsibility for that to the models that are being defined in these SDOs, not only like initially, but as if IETF, say for example, was to make changes and to make sure that those things stay, that the translations stay valid. How do you see that work happening?
So first of all, I think it's the job of 1DM to actually get this harmonization process defined. And right now we're actually discussing a document about how this process works or should work in detail. So some of the questions will be answered from that 1DM process document. But in general, I think the actual tools will be written by the ecosystems and realistically by the vendors within the ecosystems. And we need to keep up a relationship with these, preferably the people who do these tools also interface with the working group. And they will be an important voice in what changes can be made and what changes would require artificial intelligence in the tools or something like that. So we have to get them on the table.
Okay, yeah, because we've seen the tooling very important for Yang, and you mentioned open source for the models, but then for the tooling, if there was some expectations around open source tooling there, or how that would play out.
And since you asked the question, some of these tools actually have been created at hackathons. So under the WG label, we have had various hackathons. Unfortunately, not this time, but the previous IETFs, and there we actually have built components that went to those tools.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we are, unless there are more quick clarifying questions, we're out of time for the first part here. So let's move on to the second part. And here I would like to call up to the mic queue the supporting organizations. So Michael Koster, Simon, Wouter, Alan, Ari, please put yourself in the queue so we can easily find you.
Next slide.
Okay. Next slide. So, Alan.
Oh, all right. I didn't realize I was up so soon. Hi, everybody. What you're looking at is my pre-COVID picture. Hopefully you can see the smirk. I'm on the OMA board of directors. I was also at the original Zigbee Hive where we created this. And I should say we didn't create it. We identified this need. So me and some of these other participants have been trying to marshal this effort to the point where we actually make the impact that we're hoping to. So from an OMA perspective, there are two working groups, the device management and service enablement, along with the IP Smart Objects, which is a separate organization that was merged into OMA, I don't know, a little over a year ago. Next slide, please. What we did from the OMA side is we tried to make sure that we coordinated well out throughout the process here in 1DM and on the OMA side. And if you look at some of the names on this contact list, Hannes Chofenig is familiar to, I think, everybody that's ever worked in some of these areas. You've got Travis Shanahan from Itron, Bahir Derdanes from Nokia, Matt Gilmore from Itron, Scott Potter from Cisco, and I think some of you may know Jaime as well. Joke inserted. So just the overall scope here is that we believe in this from an OMA perspective. We've been working from this from an OMA perspective from the very beginning, and so we're trying to actively, I don't want to say adopt because that might be too strong a word, but make sure that the 1DM models become a source of truth. And that essentially is the big issue here. All right, next, please. So if you just look at this, obviously we acknowledge the value here. Not only do we acknowledge it, we want to enhance it, endorse it, evolve it, and continue to really make this real. And that's the key to having IETF adopt it, is to make it real. All right. The BSD3 clause license was also very important. That was a decision that was debated, and the BSD3 clause is the most, let's say, easily adopted of the open source licenses across the different organizations, and that was key, is adoption. All right, next, please. Am I done? Now, I would like to say that I did this, but that would be stealing from Ari. Because Ari just, I love this tool. And what it is a very active. You copy an SDF on the left, you convert lightweight M to M on the right, you can cut and paste into lightweight M to M on the right, convert it to SDF on the left. It's active, it's real time, and it's, what's the word I want to use? It maintains fidelity across the two models, and that was our biggest, I would say our biggest bonus, was just to maintain that fidelity. And this was a great tool, so thank you again, Ari, on this one. All right, I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to appear twice here, but first, from the point of view of Zigbee Alliance, well, this is me. I'm on the board of directors of Zigbee Alliance. I'm on the Project CHIP steering committee. I helped form Project CHIP, and I'm also helping to lead the data model of the work in Project CHIP, as well as across the other projects within Zigbee Alliance. Slide, please. Yeah, so I'm going to represent our use cases in Zigbee, why we're interested in one data model, and sort of, I think that the impetus has already been explained. It did come from Zigbee and a cross ecosystem industry-wide effort back about 1.5 years ago. So we really want to provide a more tool-friendly entry point for developers currently using XML, and we
Did we lose Michael's audio?
Yeah, we did. We lost Michael's audio. Why don't we go ahead with Router then?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm the technical steering committee, coordination steering committee chair of the Open Connectivity Foundation, and we were involved in 1DM from the beginning, and all the things that happened before we went public were done under OCF NDAs. So that gave us all the freedom to discuss under NDA without issues that we could reach this result. One of the things that we like to say is that OCF has adopted the BSD 3 class license. So we changed our internal working with data models to contribute to this effort. And also, one of the things that we did is create conversion models between OCF used models and SDF, and vice versa. It is not as sleek as what Lightweight M2M did with a nice UI, but it's just a Python tooling, but it works perfectly fine as well. So that's the reason why we definitely think that SDF is a way forward to get out of the only view on yourself issue with all these technologies. All the organizations that we have talked to right now, this is one of the things that we really like to use going forward to open up and get rid of silos, because the interoperability starts with data models. If you don't understand data models, then all the communication that you have been established before is not that useful. So one of the things that we did is also, next slide please, send a liaison to 1DM, and it's on the public website that we obviously endorse all this work. Any questions?
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm representing Bluetooth here, so I'm Simon Slupik, chairing the Mesh working group at Bluetooth SIG, and also representing one of the Bluetooth member companies. We very much believe in interoperability, and actually interoperability has been the cornerstone for Bluetooth for the last 20 plus years. So Bluetooth is really the synonym of interoperability. And when looking at the IoT space now, especially smart buildings, this is our one of our focus areas. We believe the One Data Model initiative is extremely important. Protocol wire formats or wireless formats are secondary and can be derived. Agreements on models, and even before that, agreements on model description language is paramount. Therefore, we very strongly endorse this effort and are very happy to be part of that. I would also like to say that there are discussions, and we are really looking to using SDF as the native representation for the models that Bluetooth adopts and publishes. So down the road, we believe this will be our native environment for whatever comes out from this organization. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Simon. Next up is Michael again. Michael Koster, can you see if it works out this time?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Oh, great. I thought I was being heard before because the little audio bar chart was moving, the little spectrum chart. Anyway, so as I work for Smart Things, that's our vendor. We have a IoT platform that serves quite a few people, and my role at Smart Things is mostly IoT industry standards, and I also work on the Smart Things capability model, which is our internal, you might say, version of 1DM that we use internally to normalize all the different data models of different devices that we have across our platforms to a single application. Next slide, please. So we really see a lot of uses for 1DM, and it's seeing come into the platform in a number of different places. The first is sort of the device integration, where we're going to be able to get SDF files for the different devices that we integrate, and that's going to make it really easy to automate integrating those devices into the platform. And sometimes we need to generate code or generate device drivers, and it's going to make that quite a bit easier. And even if we don't get SDF, we can easily create the SDF for a device based on whatever its native data model is and integrate that way. And this already makes it easier to do that. Internally, we have a capability model already that looks quite a bit like SDF in terms of a meta model, and we could replace that with SDF. We're moving to a more service-oriented management of that data model as we integrate more and more devices and more custom devices with custom capabilities. We're seeing a lot more people get involved in defining and using the data models, developers that aren't really data model experts but need to do this as part of their jobs. So SDF is something that's going to, as I mentioned with the Zigbee, provide a tool-friendly developer entry point that they can use, and as a standard, people will already know it. So we're really expecting this to broaden the participation in this modeling as well, and also bring it into standards. And SDF is already, well semantically aligned, so the tools will work the same with SDF as they do with our existing model. And then we have third-party APIs that we integrate, and currently have a few different protocols that we can do that through, including MQTT and REST protocol and a more sort of cloud-to-cloud event stream type protocol. And we can use Swagger and things like that, but we need also the semantic integration. So SDF is going to be a way for us to integrate those third-party APIs semantically as well. And that's really all I wanted to talk about, was mainly our use cases.
Thank you very much. Do you want to say just, we don't have so much time, but the Zigbee, was there more on the Zigbee slide?
Yeah, well, you could go back to that, and I'll talk to a little bit. But basically, we're already sort of down the road with this in Zigbee, but we're using XML, and we see SDF as a more developer-friendly way of doing that, as well as within our own organization in Zigbee. We have now CHIP and Zigbee Pro and the Jupyter Mesh protocol, and we want to use the same models across all of those, but they have different code generators. So we're planning on maybe using XML as more of an assembly language and using SDF.
Michael, we lost you again. Michael, we lost you again, I'm afraid. Okay, while Michael Koster tries to reconnect, Ari?
Sure, I'll be giving a short overview from Ericsson's point of view. So maybe go for the next slide, please. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So of course, also at Ericsson, we believe strongly in the interoperability as a key driver for value in IoT, and we see a lot of potential in different aspects that all the previous speakers already highlighted. But in particular, we see in SDF valuable tool for reducing integration cost when it comes to IoT platforms. So one of the use cases that has got the most interest with our developers so far is to use SDF to provision data sources from different ecosystems. So if we can have a common standardized language, that can tremendously reduce the effort and cost for integrating different heterogeneous systems to IoT platforms. Also, another use we are currently exploring is to enable applications to use the lightweight M2M protocol and IPSO data models together with other protocols and data models in the same application with unified semantics provided by SDF. So we have ongoing work on proof of concept on that, and it seems to be pretty promising so far. And also, as both Alan and Karsten already mentioned, we have been involved in tools development for both modeling and translation, and our contributions are available as open source in GitHub, and you have the link there on the slide. But overall, very much looking forward to have the SDF language standardized and use it to address all of these interoperability challenges. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ari. So, Michael Koster, did you have anything else on your slide that you wanted to say, or? I think we are pretty much at the clarifying questions point otherwise.
No, thank you. That's it for me.
Okay, thank you very much. So, are there any clarifying questions to the previous presentations here, or the ecosystem input? Okay, great. If not, then we are moving on to the key session. We're actually on time here. That's good. We will have a discussion now on what to do with this, and after that, we have a couple of calling the questions. But since this is not a working group forming graph, we will sort of try to decide on what to do next. And here are roughly the questions that we will try to ask. Do we have agreement about this being a good idea to do? Do we have the energy to do this work? And is IETF the right place to do it? So with that, I now open the queue, the mic line. So please get in the mic line, and we will try to figure out what to do next. Okay, Cullen first. I will put you on. There you go. Whoops. Cullen, you're live. You don't have any audio.
Now, okay. That's really interesting. The icon show me is having no audio now, but now can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So there's really a question about change control and how done this is. So I've heard some comments about SDF that like, wow, it'd be nice if it had a much more an extensibility model where you could say, I have an object that's much like some other object, but it doesn't end. So how much are we open to significant, not small fixing up changes, but significant rechange of SDF, or do people want to keep it largely as it is? I mean, one of the things I think I like about it is it seems fairly functional as it is. So what's the view on basically change control and how is this a starting point or is this a close to done point, I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
Karsten, you want to, or Michael? I now get echo.
Well, I tried to say in my presentation that this is actually an unusually a specification that is unusually open to significant changes because of the way that this is not a format that people actually directly write in. They do that now and then, but really that they build tools to translate into and out to. So it is relatively easy to make a sweeping change. And we did a number of sweeping changes in the weeks that led up to 1.0. And it was a pretty painless situation. So it's never without cost, of course. We are not going to do this if there isn't a good reason. But I'm really very satisfied with the way these changes worked.
Thanks.
Thank you. So I don't see anybody in the queue. Please enter the queue by clicking the mic.
Okay. Nicholas, could I jump in and possibly answer Cullen as well? Yeah, Cullen, I think the answer is actually both. It's a well-established floor of where we start to do evolution, but evolution is always beneficial in the sense that if there are more use cases we need to address, we can do that. So I think it's both. We have a great foundation, but yeah, we need to continue to evolve.
Kind of object-oriented subclassing type mechanism.
I'm not going with inheritance on this one.
But Cullen was asking that. That's what I thought I heard him say.
I sort of use that as an example, but I get I understand why probably this group has decided that's not the right model for them. I wasn't arguing for that model. I was just trying to pick an example of something that was a significant change.
I can add that why we went public is that we now have a working situation which fits multiple ecosystems already, and there are already I'm not saying issues, enhancements needed to do this. But at some time you have to draw a line in what is sufficient to get started, and this is, I think, a very reasonable set of constructs that we can use already. Is this enough? No, but this kind of work will probably never stop, because there is always something new on the horizon that where you need to be adapting to.
Thank you, Wouter. Any more questions? Andre, please go ahead. Andre, we can't hear you. There you go.
Okay. I've worked for a long time on performance questions, and I found that performance is very often an afterthought. So I'm wondering if it's a good opportunity now to try and embed performance characteristics into this definition format, so that things can be captured early on. It may be that some of the devices that you're monitoring or controlling need to be spoken to within a certain amount of time, or have domain-specific performance requirements that need to be understood. And it seems to me that this might be a good place to capture that early in the game, so that you can at least draw attention to the need to think about performance issues, so that when you knit the whole system together, you're not suddenly stuck with capacity or unresponsiveness that undermines functionality. And it seems that one could come up with a taxonomy of performance characteristics and requirements that could be taken into account and captured in this kind of a framework.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is an interesting topic. I think Karsten addressed some part of this before, and it's perhaps not right now, at least, what was intended with the group. But I guess it could easily be. I mean, I could see it as an extension. Karsten or someone else, you want to have additional comments to that?
I'm happy to take the issue offline with Karsten or whoever. This may be something that requires a lot more thought than we have time for right now.
Yeah, let's discuss this on the mailing list. We have an ASDF mailing list that we haven't made much use of yet, and I think that's a good point to have the discussion in a way that other people can participate.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we do have an empty queue. I hope that means that everybody is happy with this. So unless any final thoughts about this, I think we should, there is no need to linger here and try to move on. And actually, the idea with this BOF, it was also asked in the Jabber room, that why is this BOF not the working group forming BOF? And the reason was that there was a wish to see more sort of industry support for this beforehand, and that is why we had lined up all the industry folks on this BOF. And but as you can see, this work has been progressing and is reasonably mature as is, with, of course, the caveat that it will be taken over by IETF, the particular SDF specification work, and the resulting specifications. Given that I don't really see any or hear any disagreement, Barry, do you want to comment anything from an AD perspective before we move on here, or?
No,
Barry, please
I
go
don't
ahead.
have any comments. I think this has gone well. Let's just get a sense of whether people think the IETF is the right place to do this.
Yeah. So exactly, and maybe that should be the. I think there are different ways to formulate this. There is, as far as I can tell, no disagreement about this work being useful and so on. And so the big key question is, and also came out of the initial sort of BOF request, is this the right? Is IETF the place to do this? So maybe we might want to do a hum afterwards, but since the humming seems to be a bit controversial this time, let's just walk through this and see if you have disagreements or disagree with this. Please ask for objections, basically, and then we can. So I will just move through these questions, and please ask for objections if you don't agree. So first of all. The next stage from this, after this BOF, if everybody's okay or if there is rough consensus, will be to draw up a charter and have that discussed on the mailing list. So, and the charter to reasonably cover what was covered in the presentations here today. Are there any objections to that? Great. Everybody is either asleep or agreeing. Fantastic. Then the question is, do we have energy for this? It seems to me that the user industries, at least, they have energy for this. They have expressed strong support for this, and both anecdotal and real. But also the question is, of course, is there enough IETFers who would like to do work on this? And as you've seen there is a bunch of highly engaged IETFers in IT space already involved with this work. And honestly, I don't really know how to measure the energy without seeing folks raising their hands or so. Yeah.
Try it with a hum.
Yeah. Should we try it with a hum?
Something like, if you would be participating in this work, hum, and something like that. And just get a sense of whether, if we're talking about piano, maybe not. If we're talking about fortissimo, we have a good answer.
Okay. Let's do as Barry said. If you would like to be engaged with this, I will now try out this hum tool. And the first question will be, if this work starts, would you, let's see here. If you will participate in this work, please hum now when I will start the timer. You need to go to the hum tab and click on whatever hum level you want. Sorry for not saying that before.
See it.
To the left of the chat icon, to the very left where you see the attendance, chat, and to the left there is these small bars you can go into and press hum.
So I think we have a good answer.
Yeah. Then I guess with this size of community, I don't think we need to have a. Should we anyway do a? I'm new to this sort of running both, to this kind of buff, so please bear with me here. Do you want to have a negative question as well, or?
We already asked for objections and didn't have any.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think that covers that. But the sense of a fortissimo hum saying I would work on it is encouraging.
Great. Then we will have the next question. and that would be the is IETF the right place, right? Give me a second here to pick up the. Should IETF do this? So I hope everybody has found the hum button, and I will start out with a positive question here.
Again, on this one, since we've had no objections, I don't know that the hum will actually give you any information. But I mean, do whatever you want. But
right. More to the point, each schooler asked a question in the Gabber room of, can we have a discussion about where else it would get done if not here? And I think that's more useful than having a hum about whether it should get done here, because I think we already have people saying they want to work on it here. Let's talk about what the alternatives would be.
Yeah. So okay, let's wait with a eventual hum for that and move back to the main queue then. And so obviously the one DM folks have think that SDF, as Carsten stated and the other stated, I think that IETF would be the right place. And I mean, that I assume comes from internal discussions about what would be the right place. So, I mean, I think if we want to tell the SDF folks to go elsewhere, we should also object to this. There needs to be some objection why it shouldn't be done in IETF, right? So if you have thoughts about this, please get on the mic line and sort of, if you can, so we can discuss it. So I don't really hear any anyone coming to the mic. Don't see anyone coming to the mic line, and I don't see any further points in the chat. So with that, I think, I mean, it still needs to have a working charter, and the charter must be approved by the right folks and so on. But as I see it, there is no really any enthusiasm to discuss any other alternative places to do this work. Colin, you want to say anything, or?
this has been really well run BOF and really convincing. Like, why don't we have the charter and humming on it right now? Like, was there a reason we didn't do this? It just seems like, particularly given the timeline of how quickly you want to move. I'm just curious.
Yeah. This is Barry. I can answer that. This came from the BOF approval call in the IESG and IAB, Cullen, which you were part of. There, perhaps you remember there were some concerns about the industry pickup on this, and whether this was just a few people interested or whether there was broad interest, and so we approved it as a non-working group forming BOF with that in mind.
Got it. Okay.
So we can, it sounds to me that it's pretty clear that the next plan is to get the charter out on the mailing list and finalize it and send it to me.
I definitely agree with that plan. If anyone thinks that isn't the plan, that's what we should be talking about right now. Otherwise, I think we're largely done.
I agree with that.
Okay, so we have Pete here. Pete, go ahead.
Yeah, do I have? Yes, I do have audio. Good. I was just wondering, it sounds like you've got a charter in your back pocket waiting to be worked on. Is there anything controversial about that charter? We are early in the day. Is it okay to talk about whether there are particular issues that we should be thinking about that you all need input on for that charter right now?
Carsten? as the charter writer.
Yeah, maybe we actually should show this charter now, even though it's slightly against protocol to do.
Well, and I mean, look, you don't have to show the actual charter, and we don't have to go through it piece by piece. I'm just thinking if there's anything that you feel like is currently something that you were thinking, I'm going to need group, input into this particular part. That might be useful to discuss now. Going through it line by line, I don't think is going to be a productive use of time because no one's had a chance to look at it previously. But if there's a particular topic that you think you need help with, take the help.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
I think the interesting thing about the work of this group is that somehow this.
Sorry, Carsten. Carsten, Michael, can you make this bigger because it's impossible to read? Thanks. Go ahead, Carsten. Sorry.
Yeah, I think you can scroll down from the background. I think we covered the background here, so just the 3 paragraphs about ASDF. And I think the interesting thing about SDF is that it's a bit of a stew of different technologies. And handling this stew is maybe something that we haven't done as much. And the inputs come from various places. And some of them can be handled separately. So, for instance, we had this JSON path thing yesterday where we don't know whether we will need it or not. We will need it on the discovery side, but we don't necessarily need it in SDF itself. So there are things like how do we actually do the data modeling part? How do we do the interaction modeling part? What parts do we import? I would hope that we actually can handle all these questions in the working group. So sometimes the ISG wants decisions to be made before the working group is formed, so the working group doesn't get itself blocked by some bike share discussion. But I'm not seeing that problem at the moment. The way we arrived at SDF 1.0 was a pretty constructive process, and I think we can continue this process. So I'm not seeing the need to actually put any of this in the charter. So there are a few working group relationships and research group relationships down there. The CBOR working group, because that's home of the CDDA specification. The formal description techniques proposed research group, that might be a number of people to talk to, and of course the thing-to-thing research group that has done work in this space for a couple of years now. Barry.
Barry, go ahead.
Okay. The only thing that strikes me in the text here is the bit that says to work with 1DM and its contributing organizations. And I'm sure that's going to get some questions from the IESG if it goes forward that way. Along the line of concern about there being representatives from 1DM who say 1DM says this, rather than having participants as individuals working on this. So maybe respinning that sentence would be useful. You know how the IETF works. The point is we don't want other organizations throwing things over the transom. We would prefer to have the people who care to be in the working group doing the work.
Yeah, we don't want to do this based on liaison statements. And I think 1DM already understands that because it is a liaison organization, so it knows exactly how useful liaison statements are, except maybe for expressing support. Yeah, that text should be changed. I agree.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. I mean, it's a good point. So I understand that this is not something that now at least people have seen this charter. And so should this charter be discussed on the ASDF list? I guess so.
I think so, yes.
Yeah. So please sign up for the ASDF list and for the charter discussions if you have further interest in this. And then I think we have a clear plan forward, right? Move this along, as Barry said, until the charter is approved, and then start the work. Yeah, there you can see the mailing list. ASDF, very easy to remember and very easy to type. Good name. Okay. Are there any other, because we actually have a couple of minutes left, are there any other comments to this, or are everybody happy now, so we can move along with the preparations for next meetings?
So if you're interested in SDF, there are various tutorial resources you could use. One is on my YouTube channel. There is 1dm.org, which is, maybe you can bring up 1dm.org briefly, which is the landing page for information about 1DM. And there you also find the GitHub repositories where the various models, the various stages are kept. And this is all work in progress, so it's not finished. And we know this needs lots of work, but I think it's a good way to get familiarized with this.
Georgios, you had a comment?
Hi, it's Georgios Karagiannis here. I have a question.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, maybe I had to put this question earlier, but I would like to know whether we have looked into what is happening or what in other SDOs, for example, the 1M2M and maybe W3C on this area. Have you looked into what they are doing there?
Very much so, yes. So I even have a slide for W3C if you want to see that. It's in the backup materials.
Yeah, okay, I can check. I can check that.
Okay.
Just a question. I wanted to know if you have considered, the work that's being done in other SDOs on this.
Yeah, that's Michael Costa's slide. Do you want to talk to this, Michael Costa?
That's right. We and a number of us individually and also as an organization to some extent, we work with the Web of Things group, and I'm particular. My involvement has been to kick off the protocol binding activity part of thing description. What we're focusing on is the domain-specific vocabularies, and that's specifically excluded from the Web of Things. So we're very much complementary, and the meta model is very much aligned around event action property. And we have even in the W3C Plugfest now using 1DM annotations, which provide fixed URIs for concepts. We plug those into thing description. So it's a complementary thing where you have an SDF model that describes the semantics of the thing, and then you have a thing description that applies those semantics to a network object and specifies protocol bindings and over the wire data formats.
Okay, and is there an agreement between what is being done in W3C and what 1DM is doing on this?
Yes, we're currently working on a feature of thing description called thing description templates, where there's a possibility to make thing descriptions composable by plugging in 1DM definitions for objects into a thing description and composing them that way. And we're currently actively working on that in the Plugfests, and as there are a number of other intersections also. For example, discovery. If you want to say find a temperature sensor, the terminology you use, the semantic concept, URI, and all that would be potentially a 1DM URI if you're looking for a temperature sensor. Although there are other vocabularies like IoT schema that are also aligned and can be just directly linked to. So at this point, we're just really linking to URIs.
Okay,
Thank you,
thanks.
Mike.
And regarding 1MTM, have you looked into that?
1MTM was involved early on, but we had to partition the work because of the conflict with Huawei, which is now over and has been mostly resolved by there was specifically a U.S. thing, but it impacted a lot of companies' abilities to participate. But so 1M2M is potentially part of this, and also the modeling part of 1DM. Sorry, 1M2M and 1DM is another potential intersection.
Okay, thanks. So you are saying that there is also an agreement between 1MTM and 1DM?
Yeah, but there was early on, but there hasn't been a lot of participation, and we're hoping that with this and now it being open, that anyone can participate. That what we need to get 1M2M back into the participating.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe one thing I could add is that the Think of Thing research group has been organizing a number of informal events where we bring people from different SDOs and vendors together. And we have had a lot of workshops with W3C in the process of creating this. So W3C is the Web of Things interest group there is a bit of a sister organization of the Think of Thing research group in a way. They also have a working group, but they have an interest group as well. And while I have the microphone, I could place an advertisement for the next WG call, which will be the day after tomorrow, where we will talk with Microsoft about their Azure DTDL digital twin description language. So that's another language we want to take in the fold of SDF, and we will have a discussion the day after tomorrow how that might work. So the coordinates are on the Think to Think research group mailing list, or we probably can send an invite to the ASDF mailing list as well.
You're sending. Thank you, Karsten. Very good points. I think one thing that came up during the pre-BOF discussions around this ASDF and 1DM was that 1DM coming out of the closet, so to speak, when it comes to becoming a visible organization. There were many reasons for that, and one, of course, was to be able to address more organizations than were covered by the original liaison statements. So this is definitely very much about reaching out to other organizations and incorporating their requirements, etc. So I think after this long sidetrack at the end here, do we have any other? I think we're actually done. Any last thoughts or so from someone? Anybody? Okay.
I just want to say thanks for the chairs. I agree that this was a very well run BOF, and thanks a lot.
Thank you, Barry. Okay, everyone. With that, we're done for today. And many thanks to Jaime and Ari for taking notes. Thanks a lot for that. So take care, everyone, and have a great work from home IETF week. Take care. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.